The numbers on the holographic display refused to change, no matter how many times Ambassador Rith refreshed the emergency feed. 6,000 colonists trapped on Ashfall, their life support systems failing while volcanic ash buried their settlement deeper with each passing hour. He stood in the center of the galactic assembly chambers, his voice growing hoarse from 3 days of continuous debate. Please, honored representatives, the geological surveys confirm another eruption within 18 hours. We must act now. Rith's plea echoed through the vast circular room where 47 different species sat in their designated sections. Each faction had its own concerns, its own territorial claims, its own reasons why a rescue mission required more discussion. The Valerian Collective insisted the colony fell within their historical boundaries. The Merchant Guild produced ancient trade documents claiming jurisdiction. The Frontier Union argued their exploration rights superseded all other claims. Meanwhile, the colonists on Ashfall watched their oxygen levels drop and their children develop respiratory problems from the toxic air seeping through damaged filters. And Foster sat in the human section, her fingers drumming against the armrest of her observer chair. Earth had joined the assembly only 8 years ago, which meant humans could watch debates but rarely vote on major decisions. She listened to the politicians argue about border treaties from 2 centuries past, while live video feeds showed frightened families huddling in underground shelters. A Valerian counselor stood, his crystalline features refracting the chamber lights. We cannot set a precedent of ignoring territorial sovereignty. What if every species decided to enter disputed zones without proper authorization? The authorization process requires 6 weeks minimum, another delegate countered. Those colonists will be dead in 6 days. Then perhaps we should form a special committee to explore expedited procedures for future emergencies, someone suggested, and the chamber erupted into discussions about committee structures, voting procedures, and jurisdictional frameworks. And watched a child on the video feed cough in her hands, her face covered in ash dust despite being indoors. The girl couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She reminded Anne of her niece back on Earth. How long does it take to review the committee proposal? A delegate asked. Standard review requires 14 days, then a preliminary vote, then amendments, and stood up so abruptly her chair scraped against the polished floor. The sound cut through the droning debate like a knife. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the human section. With all due respect to this assembly, and said, her voice calm but firm, we don't have 14 days. We don't have 6 weeks. We have hours before those people suffocate or get buried under volcanic debris. Ambassador Rith looked at her with something between hope and warning. Captain Foster, humans do not have speaking privileges in territorial disputes. I'm not disputing territory. I'm talking about 6,000 living beings who need help right now. And gestured toward the video feeds surrounding the chamber. You can debate who has the right to save them, or you can explain a history why nobody did. A Merchant Guild representative stood, his mechanical augmentations whirring softly. The human suggests we abandon centuries of carefully negotiated protocols. Chaos would result if every species acted unilaterally. I'm suggesting, and replied, that sometimes saving lives matters more than following procedures designed for trade disputes. The chamber filled with outraged voices. Multiple delegates spoke simultaneously about treaty violations, sovereignty issues, and the dangerous precedent of ignoring established law, and listened for exactly 30 seconds, then made her decision. Rolling thunder to Captain Foster, she spoke into her communicator, ignoring the protests around her. Prepare for immediate departure. Set course for Ashfall. The chamber fell silent. Ambassador Rith stared at her in shock. Captain, you cannot be serious. You have no authorization, no jurisdiction clearance, no time, and finished. She looked around at the assembled representatives, these politicians from dozens of worlds who specialized in lengthy discussions while emergencies unfolded. You can file complaints, issue sanctions, revoke our membership. But in the time it takes you to draft those documents, I can have those colonists loaded onto my ships. She walked toward the exit, her boots echoing in the sudden silence. As she reached the doors, She turned back one final time. My vessel has room for 800 people. I know 6 other human cargo ships in this sector. We can evacuate everyone if we move fast. You will face severe consequences, the Merchant Guild representative warned. Your species could be expelled from this assembly, and smiled without humor. 6,000 people or political consequences. That's an easy choice. She activated her communicator again. This is Foster to all human vessels within 3 light years. We have a rescue mission on Ashfall. Volcanic disaster, failing life support, politicians arguing about jurisdiction. Who's with me? The responses came immediately. Captain Roger of Frontier Spirit answered first, already plotting the course. Stardust runner ready to deploy. Another voice confirmed point one by one. 7 human ships acknowledged and began changing course toward the dying colony, and nodded to herself and left the assembly chambers while chaos erupted behind her. She heard Ambassador Rith calling for order, heard delegates demanding sanctions, heard the endless debate continue. But she also heard something else through her communicator, the voice of Pale, the colony coordinator on Ashfall, who had been listening to the transmission. "You're really coming?" Without permission, and stepped into her shuttle and initiated launch protocols. "We don't seek permission to do what's right. We just do it. Hold on down there. We're on our way." The ash clouds looked worse in person than they had on the assembly feeds, and watched through Rolling Thunder's reinforced viewport as volcanic debris swirled in angry patterns across Ashfall's atmosphere. 3 massive volcanoes spewed material high enough to create a permanent twilight across the entire continent where Broken Ridge Colony clung to existence. "Computer navigation is useless," Lee reported from the engineering station. "Too much interference from the particulate matter. Sensors are basically blind beyond 50 meters," and studied the swirling chaos below. 7 human ships had converged on Ashfall, their captains waiting for her plan. The problem was simple. Traditional automated landing systems required clear sensor data. They had neither clear skies nor functioning sensors. Any standard approach would end with ships crashing into mountains they couldn't see. So we fly manual, and said, like our ancestors did before computers. Roger's voice crackled over the communication channel. "You want us to pilot cargo ships through volcanic ash storms by hand? These vessels weren't designed for atmospheric acrobatics. They weren't designed for rescue operations either. But here we are," and switched her controls to manual mode, feeling the ship's responses become more direct, less filtered through safety protocols. "Our ships have reinforced hulls for asteroid debris. That should handle the heat and impacts. We just need to see where we're going." She pushed Rolling Thunder into Ashfall's upper atmosphere. The ship shuddered as it hit the ash clouds, and visibility dropped to almost nothing, and flew by instinct, watching for brief clearings in the debris, adjusting course when she glimpsed landmarks below. It felt like driving through a sandstorm on Earth, except the sand was superheated rock fragments. The other human ships followed her lead, their pilots trusting manual control over failed automation, and heard their terse communications as they navigated the treacherous descent. One ship clipped a mountainside and had to pull up sharply. Another reported ash getting into an air intake, reducing engine efficiency. But they kept coming, descending through conditions that would have kept any sensible vessel in orbit. Broken Ridge Colony appeared through a momentary gap in the ash. The settlement looked worse than the video feeds had shown. Half the structures were already buried. Lava flows approached from the west, glowing orange rivers that consumed everything in their path. The landing zones were trembling ground covered in a meter of volcanic debris, and brought Rolling Thunder down hard, the ship's weight compressing the ash beneath its landing gear. She felt the ground shaking through the hull, another eruption building somewhere nearby. There was no time for careful procedures. "Cargo bay doors open," she ordered. "Let's move." The moment her crew opened the exterior hatches, colonists began running toward the ships. Pale, the colony coordinator, directed traffic with desperate efficiency. He was a Trellin, his multiple limbs allowing him to gesture toward different ships simultaneously while checking a datapad with another hand. Children and elderly first. Pale shouted over the roar of volcanic activity. Don't worry about belongings. Just get aboard. And crew abandoned their cargo to make room. Crates of manufactured goods got shoved out onto the ash-covered ground. Food supplies, replacement parts, luxury items, all of it became worthless compared to living space. The humans worked with brutal pragmatism, calculating volumes and weights in their heads, cramming people into every available space. A Valerian family hesitated at Rolling Thunder's ramp. The father stared at and with conflicted eyes. Your species has no jurisdiction here. This rescue isn't authorized. You're absolutely right, and agreed, helping his daughter up the ramp. You can file a formal complaint once you're not suffocating. Now move. The ground shook harder. Lee shouted a warning from the cockpit. Seismic sensors show something big building. We need to leave soon. But hundreds of colonists still waited for evacuation and watched Roger's ship, Frontier Spirit, settle onto a landing zone that was visibly cracking as lava approached from below. Roger ignored the danger, his crew continuing to load people even as heat warnings blared inside their vessel. Roger, your landing zone is compromised and transmitted. Get out of there. Not yet. Still loading. And understood that stubbornness. It was the same instinct that brought them here against assembly orders. The same refusal to abandon people just because someone in authority said they should. She turned back to her own loading operation, helping a merchant guild administrator who probably voted against human membership just weeks ago. Why are you doing this? The administrator asked between coughs. Your species gains nothing but punishment. And lifted a small child into her arms, the kid's breathing mask fogged with condensation. We gained the knowledge that we tried. That has to be enough. A massive explosion lit up the darkened sky. One of the volcanoes had reached a critical point, ejecting a pyroclastic flow, superheated gas, and rock that moved faster than any ship could escape if it got too close. The deadly cloud rolled toward the colony like a breaking wave. All ships, immediate departure, and commanded. Now. The human vessels lifted off simultaneously, overloaded and straining against Ashfall's gravity. And ship groaned under the weight of 800 people crammed into spaces meant for 200. She didn't care about safety ratings or recommended capacity limits. The only number that mattered was lives saved. Frontier Spirit was last to lift off, its landing gear leaving the ground just as lava consumed the spot where it had stood. Roger's engines screamed in protest, one of them damaged from ash intake, but the ship climbed anyway through sheer determination, and watched through her rear sensors as Broken Ridge Colony disappeared beneath lava and ash. 3 days of assembly debate, 7 human ships, 4 hours of impossible flying, and 5,847 colonists now crammed into vessels limping toward orbit. Behind them, the settlement that had been someone's home ceased to exist. Station Harmony's medical bays had never processed so many emergency patients simultaneously, and watched from an observation deck as doctors from a dozen species treated colonists for smoke inhalation, burns, and shock. The rescued people stumbled through medical checkpoints, many crying with relief, others staring blankly at walls as trauma set, and a human medic treated a young Valerian girl whose breathing mask had failed during the evacuation. The child clutched a stuffed toy that was mostly ash now, but she wouldn't let it go. Her mother stood nearby, watching the human doctor work with equipment unfamiliar to her species, but effective nonetheless. Emergency assembly session convenes in 1 hour, Lee informed, and reading from a notification on his datapad. You're required to appear before the full council. And nodded. She had expected this. The political consequences were always going to arrive eventually. She just made sure they arrived after the rescue was complete, not before. The council chambers felt different when she entered alone. During normal sessions, she sat with other human observers in their designated section. Today, she stood in the center of the circular room where accused parties faced judgment. The representatives of 47 species looked down at her from their elevated seats, their faces showing everything from outrage to grudging respect. Ambassador Rith stood to present the charges. He looked uncomfortable, his crystalline features dimmer than usual. Captain and Foster, you were charged with unauthorized military action, violation of territorial sovereignty, breach of assembly protocols, and I didn't conduct military action, and interrupted. I conducted a rescue operation. Without permission, a merchant guild representative added sharply. You violated the sovereignty of 3 separate factions. You entered disputed territory despite explicit orders to wait for proper authorization, and met his gaze steadily. I saved 6,000 lives while this assembly debated jurisdiction. That's not a crime in my mind. The law is not determined by individual minds, Ambassador Rith said quietly. If everyone acted on personal judgment, ignoring established procedures, we would descend into chaos. Order requires that we follow protocols even when they seem slow. Order, and gestured toward the medical bays visible through the chamber's transparent sections. Those people were dying in an orderly fashion while you debated. I chose disorder that keeps them breathing over order that lets them suffocate. The chamber erupted in arguments. Some delegates supported expulsion of humanity from the assembly. Others argued for sanctions, trade restrictions, or mandatory retraining in diplomatic protocols. A few remained silent, their expressions unreadable. Then Pale entered the chamber. The Trolling coordinator walked to the center area, standing beside and without asking permission. I request the right to speak on this matter. Witness testimony is permitted, Rith acknowledged. Pale looked around at the assembled representatives. I coordinated Broken Ridge Colony for 6 years. I sent emergency requests through proper channels 3 weeks before the final eruption. Those requests went through committees, subcommittees, jurisdictional reviews, and environmental impact assessments. Meanwhile, our children got sicker and our shelter walls cracked from volcanic tremors. He pulled up a holographic display showing the timeline. The human vessels arrived 4 hours after Captain Foster left this chamber. 4 hours. Your fastest response proposal would have taken 4 weeks. Every person you see in those medical bays would be dead if we had waited for permission. A Frontier Union delegate stood. We understand the emotional appeal, but law must be consistent. Today, humans rescue a colony. Tomorrow, they might invade a planet using the same justification of doing what they think is right. Do we look invaded? Another voice came from the chamber entrance. A Valerian woman walked in, holding the hand of the same child, and had helped aboard Rolling Thunder. This is my daughter. She has a respiratory condition. 3 days ago, I listened to this council debate while she choked on volcanic ash. Today she breathes because humans acted while you talked. More colonists began entering the chamber. They came in small groups, species from worlds that had voted against human membership, people who had trusted the assembly to protect them until that trust proved hollow. They didn't make speeches or legal arguments. They simply stood there, alive, their presence a silent testimony that no words could match. Ambassador Rith watched them gather, his face showing an emotion and couldn't quite identify. The law exists to prevent chaos, he said finally. Captain Foster, what you did was illegal. What happens when every species decides their judgment supersedes assembly authority? And thought about that question seriously. I don't have a perfect answer. Maybe sometimes people will make wrong choices. But on Ashfall, the choice was clear. Wait for permission and watch people die, or act without permission and give them a chance to live. I made the only choice I could live with. And what are the consequences? The diplomatic fallout? The precedent this sets? I accept whatever punishment this assembly decides, and said, expel us, sanction us, revoke our membership. But that won't change the fact that 6,000 people breathed today who wouldn't have if we'd waited for permission. The chamber fell silent. Representatives looked at the colonists standing in their midst, then at their data pads showing pending votes on human expulsion. The mathematics of politics ran calculations that had nothing to do with morality. Finally, the vote began, and watch the numbers climb on the display. Expulsion required 60% approval. The counter reached 54% and stalled. 56%. 58%. It held there for a long moment as final votes came in. 59.3%. The motion failed by less than 1 percentage point and would receive an official censure, a formal reprimand that would remain on human records indefinitely. But Earth would remain in the assembly. Ambassador Rith stood as the chamber began to clear. Captain Foster, you understand that you cannot make a habit of this. The assembly cannot function if species routinely ignore its authority. And looked at the colonists filing out, returning to medical treatment or temporary housing. I understand, but I also understand that I'll make the same choice again if I have to. Rith nodded slowly. I know. That's what concerns me. 3 weeks passed before and noticed the pattern. At first, she thought the encrypted messages were coincidences. Planetary officials asking innocent questions about human ship routes. Administrators requesting technical specifications for emergency equipment. Then a minor government clerk from the Frontier Union sent coordinates to a mining accident with a simple note. 200 workers trapped, oxygen for 3 days, official rescue estimate 3 weeks. And sat in Rolling Thunder's small quarters, reading the message for the 3rd time. No official request. No assembly authorization. Just information and an unspoken question. Would humans help when the bureaucracy wouldn't? She contacted Roger, whose frontier spirit still carried scorch marks from Ashfall. You seeing these messages too? 5 in the last week, Roger confirmed. Species we've never worked with, sending coordinates to emergencies their governments won't address. They're not asking officially, just making sure we know where the problems are. They want plausible deniability and realized. If we respond, they didn't request it. If we don't, they tried through proper channels. So what do we do? And thought about the mining workers running out of oxygen while some political faction argued about rescue budgets. She thought about the assembly's warning that humans couldn't make a habit of unauthorized interventions. Then she thought about 200 people waiting to die in a mining tunnel. Send me those coordinates. She said 0.4 human vessels converged on the mining facility, arriving to find the situation worse than reported. The corporation that owned Outpost 7 had already written off the trapped workers, evacuating valuable equipment while abandoning the people who operated it, and watched through sensors as mining machines got loaded onto corporate ships while rescue equipment sat unused. This isn't an accident, Lee observed. This is cost analysis. They decided equipment was worth saving and people weren't. N's jaw tightened. She opened a communication channel to the corporate vessels. This is Captain Foster of Rolling Thunder. We're here to extract the trapped workers. You have no jurisdiction in corporate operations, came the response. We're handling this according to company policy. Your policy involved abandoning 200 employees, former employees. They were terminated when the tunnel collapsed and switched off the channel before she said something she'd regret. Roger, take the thermal cutters from my cargo bay. We're going in through the maintenance tunnels. The rescue took 8 hours of brutal work. Human crews cut through collapsed sections, stabilized unstable tunnels with improvised supports, and extracted workers one by one from spaces barely large enough to crawl through. The trapped miners were a mix of species, all employed by a corporation that fired them the moment they became inconvenient. A Trellin worker grabbed Anne's arm as she helped him into Rolling Thunder's cargo bay. Why? We're nobody to you. Not even our own company cared enough to try. That's exactly why we're here, and said. Somebody should care. News of the outpost, 7 rescues spread through unofficial networks. More messages arrived, some encrypted, some barely disguised as casual inquiries. A medical transport stranded in pirate territory. A research station with failing life support in unclaimed space. A refugee ship denied docking rights by 3 separate planets, and found herself coordinating an unofficial fleet of human vessels, each one responding to emergencies that official channels ignored. They operated in a gray zone between law and necessity, helping people who fell through bureaucratic cracks. The assembly issued warnings but took no concrete action, perhaps aware that prosecuting rescue operations would look terrible to their citizens. One evening, Ambassador Rith appeared at Rolling Thunder's docking port and met him at the airlock, surprised to see the Valerian official alone without guards or advisors. This is becoming a problem, Rith said without preamble. People needing help is always a problem, and agreed. We're just addressing it. You're undermining the entire structure of galactic governance. Do you understand that? Ritha's crystalline features flickered with agitation. Every time humans respond without authorization, you demonstrate that our protocols are unnecessary. You make the assembly look incompetent. I'm not trying to make anyone look bad. I'm trying to keep people alive. Rith pulled up a holographic display showing the recent rescues. 17 unauthorized interventions in 3 weeks. Each one technically illegal. The hardliners are building a case against humanity. They're documenting every violation, every breach of protocol. They'll use this to expel your species permanently. Then maybe the assembly should respond faster to emergencies, and suggested. If your protocols didn't leave people to die, we wouldn't need to work around them. It's not that simple. Our procedures exist because of history, because of wars fought over sovereignty violations. Do you know how many conflicts started with one species deciding they had the right to enter another's territory without permission? And consider that. I understand there's history I don't know. But I also understand that right now, today, there are people who need help that your assembly isn't providing. Should I tell them to die patiently while you debate jurisdiction? Ritha's light dimmed further. I don't have an answer that satisfies both law and conscience. That's why I'm here, not to threaten you, but to warn you. There are factions that profit when emergencies take a long time to resolve. You're costing them money and influence. They won't forgive that. Are you saying they'll retaliate? I'm saying be careful. Not everyone appreciates what you're doing. After Rith left, and sat in her quarters considering his warning, Lee entered with another message, this one from a medical facility dealing with a plague outbreak. The standard authorization process would take a month. 40,000 people would die waiting. And read the coordinates and patient count. She thought about the assembly's warnings, about political consequences, about factions who profited from slow responses to crises. Then she thought about 40,000 people who just needed help. She activated her communicator. This is Foster to all human vessels in range. We have a situation. Who's available for medical support? Greenhold was an agricultural planet. Its surface covered in carefully engineered crop fields that fed a dozen nearby systems. Patricia Hill brought her hospital ship Mercy Run through standard approach vectors, watching the planet's surface grow larger on her view screen. The plague had started in the southern farming communities 2 weeks ago, spreading rapidly through populations with no immunity to the pathogen. Medical assessment shows 42,000 active cases, her chief physician reported. Mortality rate increases each day without proper treatment. Local hospitals are overwhelmed. Patricia had commanded medical operations for Earth's deep space program before joining the civilian fleet. She understood disease progression, resource allocation, and triage protocols. She also understood that the Galactic Assembly's medical committee needed 4 weeks to authorize emergency treatment procedures for this specific pathogen. For weeks, while 40,000 people died from something humanity could treat, she sent a formal request to the Assembly, knowing the answer before it arrived. The rejection came through within 30 minutes, delivered personally by Trade Minister Halvik of the Merchant Guild. Request denied. His message stated flatly, the human vessel Mercy Run does not have authorization to operate in Greenhold system. Furthermore, the treatment protocols proposed have not completed required safety reviews. Estimated timeline for proper authorization is 28 days. Patricia read the message twice, then deleted it. Set course for Greenhold. Maximum speed. Her crew didn't question the order. They had joined Mercy Run specifically to help people, and watching 40,000 patients die while politicians debated safety reviews wasn't why they became doctors. The ship entered Greenhold's atmosphere without clearance, landing near the hardest-hit farming community. The local medical director met Patricia at the landing zone, a Selkari doctor whose features showed exhaustion and desperation. You came without authorization. The planetary government received warnings not to accept your help. Then we'll work from our ship, Patricia said. Bring the patients here. We'll treat them in our medical bays. There are 40,000 infected people scattered across 3 continents. Then we'll establish field hospitals. My crew brought portable medical units and enough supplies to treat twice that number. Patricia began unloading equipment, her medical teams moving with practiced efficiency. You can help us or stand aside, but we're not leaving until this outbreak is contained. The cell-carry doctor stared at her for a moment, then grabbed a container of medical supplies. I'll help. I became a doctor to save lives, not to follow orders that let patients die. Within hours, 3 field hospitals operated across the infected regions. Human medics worked alongside local doctors, sharing treatment protocols that Earth had developed for similar pathogens. The plague responded to aggressive antiviral therapy combined with immune system support. Patients who had been dying yesterday were sitting up today, weak but recovering, and watched the medical operation through communication channels, coordinating supply runs from other human vessels. The Assembly's response came swiftly. Trade Minister Halvik called an emergency session and demanded Patricia's immediate arrest. The council chamber felt hostile when Anne entered. She came to speak in Patricia's defense, though she had no official standing to do so. Halvik stood in the prosecutor's position, his mechanical augmentations gleaming under the chamber lights. "This is not heroism," Halvik declared. "This is systematic defiance of galactic law. First the Ashfall rescue, then Outpost 7, then 17 other incidents, and now this medical intervention. Humans have demonstrated complete disregard for Assembly authority. Humans have demonstrated that saving lives matters more than bureaucratic delays," and countered. "You call 4 weeks of safety review a bureaucratic delay? Those protocols exist to protect populations from untested treatments. What if the human methods had made the plague worse? Our methods are based on decades of Earth medical research. We're not experimenting. We're applying proven treatments, proven by human standards, not Assembly standards." Halvik's voice rose with controlled anger. "You arrogant newcomers think 8 years in the Assembly makes you experts on galactic medicine, on diplomatic protocol, on the complex balances we've maintained for centuries." And felt her own anger rising, but kept her voice level. "I think people dying while you review paperwork is unacceptable. That's not arrogance. That's basic humanity. It's anarchy disguised as compassion." Halvik activated a display showing every unauthorized human intervention. 17 rescues in 3 weeks. Each one illegal. Each one undermining the authority of this Assembly. You're teaching the galaxy that laws are optional, that any species can ignore sovereignty if they claim good intentions. The chamber filled with voices supporting both sides. Representatives argued about precedent, about sovereignty, about the balance between order and emergency response, and watched the debate swirl around her, recognizing the same patterns that had occurred during the Ashfall crisis. Politicians protecting their authority while people needed help. Then something unexpected happened. A representative from the Rim Collective stood, a small species that rarely spoke in Assembly sessions. Minister Halvik speaks of order and authority. "I wonder if he remembers how my species nearly went extinct waiting for Assembly approval to evacuate our dying planet." The chamber quieted. The Rim Collective delegate continued, her voice steady despite obvious nervousness. "We filed proper requests. We followed every protocol. We waited for committees to review our situation. By the time authorization arrived, half our population had died from environmental collapse. The human approach would have saved them." Other small faction representatives began standing. Each had a similar story. Emergencies where Assembly protocols moved too slowly. Disasters where proper channels failed to help in time. Species that, and had never heard speak publicly, now shared their experiences of being abandoned by the system that was supposed to protect them. Halvik's expression hardened. "This emotional testimony doesn't change the law. Humans must face consequences for their actions, or the entire Assembly becomes meaningless." And met his gaze directly. "Then make me face those consequences. Arrest me, sanction Earth, expel us from the Assembly. But do it after Patricia finishes treating those 40,000 patients. Let them live before you punish us for saving them." The distress call from Crossroads Station reached every human ship simultaneously. Life support failure affecting 100,000 residents. Reactor malfunction in the core systems. Critical evacuation needed within hours. And read the message 3 times, her instincts screaming that something felt wrong. The timing is suspicious, Lee said, echoing her thoughts. Right after the assembly debate about human interventions, suddenly the biggest trade hub in this sector has a catastrophic failure, and pulled up technical schematics of Crossroads Station. The facility was massive, a junction point where 7 major trade routes intersected. It held permanent populations from 30 different species. Even if it's a trap, we can't ignore 100,000 people in danger. What if they're counting on that? Then they're right to count on it. And contacted the other human captains. We have a situation at Crossroads. Could be legitimate, could be a setup. Either way, people need help. Who's coming? 12 human vessels altered course toward the station. They arrived to find chaos. Evacuation alarms blaring, crowds flooding toward docking bays, station systems failing in cascade patterns, and brought rolling thunder through the docking procedures, noting how the damage seemed to create bottlenecks that slowed rescue efforts. Her crew began evacuation operations while Lee examined the reactor malfunction data. Captain, this wasn't an accident. Someone sabotaged these systems deliberately. The failure pattern is designed to look natural, but the underlying code shows intentional corruption. En's communicator activated before she could respond. Military vessels appeared on sensors, dozens of them surrounding the human rescue fleet. Trade Minister Halvik's voice broadcast across all channels. Human vessels, you are surrounded. You will cease operations immediately and prepare for boarding. You are charged with sabotaging Crossroads Station to create this emergency. And felt ice in her chest. We just arrived. How could we possibly? We have evidence of human technical signatures in the damaged systems, Halvik interrupted. You manufactured this crisis to justify another unauthorized intervention. This time you've gone too far. On Anne's tactical display, the military vessels powered up weapons. 12 human ships, surrounded by more than 30 armed vessels. Behind them, Crossroads Station continued its evacuation with 70,000 people still aboard. You want us to leave while the evacuation is incomplete. And asked, I want you to surrender for prosecution. The evacuation will proceed under proper military supervision once you comply. And looked at her crew. Patricia's voice came through on a private channel. My medical teams are still aboard the station treating injured. If we leave now, people will die. Roger added his assessment. Frontier spirit can't outrun military ships with the damage we're carrying. If this turns into a chase, they'll catch us. And made a decision that felt inevitable. All human vessels continue evacuation operations. Ignore the military presence. Captain Foster, I will open fire if you don't comply, Halvik warned. Then fire. But know that you'll be shooting rescue vessels while 100,000 civilians watch. And kept her voice steady. You'll get your demonstration of human defiance, but everyone in the galaxy will see you attacking people trying to save lives. The moment stretched. Military vessels held position, weapons charged but not firing. Anne's crews continued loading evacuees, working frantically while surrounded by ships that could destroy them instantly. Then another voice cut through the communication channels. Ambassador Rith transmitted on all frequencies simultaneously. Minister Halvik, I'm releasing classified files to public networks. Stand down immediately. What files? Halvik demanded. The ones showing your faction sabotage Crossroads Station. The communication logs proving you manufactured this crisis to trap the humans. The financial records showing how your coalition profits from delayed emergency responses. And watch her display as data flooded across galactic networks. Encrypted communications between Halvik's people discussing the sabotage plan. Records of similar incidents where emergencies were deliberately prolonged for political advantage. Evidence of corporations and government officials working together to profit from others' suffering. The military vessels began receiving contradictory orders. Some captains powered down weapons immediately. Others waited for confirmation. The coalition that supported Halvik started fracturing as members scrambled to avoid prosecution. "This is fabricated evidence," Halvik protested, but his voice carried desperation now. "It's archived and authenticated," Rith replied calmly. "The entire galaxy is watching. You can continue this charade or stand down." The military vessels withdrew one by one. Ann's crews continued evacuation operations, now working without threat of attack. It took another 6 hours to extract everyone from Crossroad Station, human ships making multiple trips to transport evacuees to safe facilities. When the last civilian left the failing station and sat in Rolling Thunder's command chair, exhausted but satisfied, Lee brought her final numbers. 100,000 evacuated. 0 casualties. 12 ships damaged, but all functional. Ambassador Rith contacted her privately. The Assembly is reorganizing. New emergency protocols that allow immediate response to crises. Local authorities with power to authorize action without central approval. "It's not perfect, but it's better. Why did you help us?" And asked, "You've been warning us about consequences since Ashfall." "Because I watch you choose people over politics every single time. Because my species almost went extinct once for moving too slowly. Because maybe humans are right that some things matter more than proper procedure." Ritha's image showed something that might have been a smile. The Assembly is forming an emergency response corps. Multiple species volunteering, trained for rapid deployment. They want humans to help develop the training. And looked out at the damaged station, at the rescue vessels carrying survivors, at the galaxy that was slowly learning to act faster when lives hung in balance. "We didn't set out to change anything. We just couldn't stand by and watch people die. Sometimes that's exactly what change requires. People who refuse to stand by." Rith paused. "There's already another distress call. Medical emergency in the outer territories. But this time you won't be alone. 6 other species are responding too." And smiled. The galaxy was learning.